uncovered that more than $19 million in federal budget allocations had been routed through fictitious line items, money that eventually landed in the hands of shell companies run by the brother-in-law of Representative Ronald Beckman. The odd moment, the words left her lips. The courtroom held its breath. No gasps, no exclamations. Just a silence that pressed against the walls like a held breath. It was the kind of quiet that says everything. Judge Thomas's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted. The slightest movement of his fingers steepling beneath his chin, the only clue he'd registered what was just said. Jasmine's voice remained composed. She wasn't finished. She recalled how, after she raised concerns about those allocations in an internal committee hearing, 2 separate aides approached her in private. One warned her, in no uncertain terms, that failure to back off would bury her underlayers of procedural blowback. The other was more blunt, saying directly, "They'll hit you where the law lets them." Holding up the page in her hand, she added, "That was 3 days before I received the summons that brought me to the ethics meeting. The same meeting that became the basis for the charges brought here today." She turned her gaze to the judge. "And now, here we are." The courtroom didn't move. For a beat, no one even seemed to blink. Judge Thomas, still unreadable, finally looked to the court clerk. "Has this document been submitted into the record?" Naomi, Jasmine's lead counsel, rose without hesitation. "It will be, Your Honor. We have certified copies for submission." The judge gave a single nod. But the moment was quickly challenged. The prosecutor stood, face tight with disbelief. "Objection, Your Honor. This statement could be construed as self-serving, and the witness is under oath." Before he could continue, Gabriel, the second attorney at the defense table stood calmly and countered. "And if the prosecution doubts the legitimacy of any of the submitted materials, we are fully prepared to submit them to forensic audit. Every email, every memo, every financial trail." Judge Thomas raised a hand, quieting both sides. "The court will review the documents," he said. Then he looked to Jasmine. "Continue." She turned to the final page, lifting her voice just slightly. Not in volume, but in clarity. "I know how this may appear. A sitting congresswoman facing a contempt charge, suddenly revealing accusations tied to misused funds. But I ask the court to consider, if you discovered threats made to suppress oversight, if you found proof that taxpayer money had been misappropriated, would you stay silent? Would you protect comfort? Or would you speak, knowing the risk?" "Hekwa," hand lowered. She folded the last page, slow and deliberate, and placed it back in the folder. Then she sat down, her composure unwavering. No trembling fingers, no exhale of relief. Just stillness. What she had just said now existed not only in the courtroom's air, but in its record. The murmurs began immediately. Quiet, nervous exchanges between aides and legal clerks, none daring to speak above a whisper. Still, the weight of what had been introduced hung in the room like damp fog. Judge Thomas cleared his throat, stood, and announced a 20-minute recess. Without another word, he exited through a side door. But the tension didn't leave with him. If anything, it thickened. A recess was ordinary, but the way the judge left, without a single comment, wasn't. It suggested something had changed. People looked at one another differently. A dropped pen echoed unnaturally loud. The prosecutor no longer moved with his usual confidence. He was pacing now, whispering fast, his rhythm disrupted. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't lean to her attorneys or let her eyes wander. She simply waited, calm as ever, prepared not for hope, but for whatever came. Beside her, Gabriel leaned in and murmured, "He's rattled." Naomi didn't say a word. She simply slid a second envelope across the table toward Jasmine. "Originals," she whispered. "In case they ask, across the aisle the prosecutor's," demeanor had cracked. The control he'd walked in with was gone. It wasn't the accusation that did it. It was the documentation. Jasmine hadn't made vague claims. She'd brought proof. Contracts, correspondence, dates, numbers. Enough to fracture a system too long, protected by silence. 10 minutes into recess, the clerk re-entered with a quiet message. The judge had requested immediate printed copies of the entire folder. Naomi stood without hesitation and handed them over. That was when the shift began. A young court aide, barely out of law school by the look of him, stepped out of the courtroom, a stack of fresh copies in his hands. On his way out, he passed a woman entering, another staffer, this one carrying a plain gray binder. She bent toward Naomi and murmured something too low for anyone else to hear. Jasmine tilted her head slightly. "Another submission?" Naomi gave a small nod. "From a former staffer. She watched the hearing via transcript, feed, said she has something to add." Jasmine didn't react, didn't smile. She simply tapped her fingers once against the table's surface. Let them try to bury it now. When Judge Thomas returned, he didn't speak right away. He moved slowly, deliberately, settling into his chair and adjusting his glasses before resting his attention on the thick folder in front of him, the one Naomi had handed to the clerk. Then he looked at Jasmine. "Representative Crockett," he began, his voice calm, but edged with something keener. "Is it your assertion that members of the House Ethics Subcommittee acted with intent to silence you by initiating these proceedings?" "I am stating," Jasmine replied evenly, "that members of the subcommittee and certain external actors knowingly abused their authority in retaliation for my attempts to expose the misuse of federal funds." Judge Thomas nodded, slow and deliberate. "And do you believe this conduct merits further legal examination?" "I do." He turned to the prosecution. "Counselor, had your office been made aware of the contents of these materials prior to today's session?" "No, Your Honor," the prosecutor said tightly. "We received no advance notice and cannot confirm the veracity of these claims." Naomi rose smoothly. "We are prepared to submit a third-party affidavit from an independent analyst who reviewed the records. Additionally, a signed statement from a former congressional aide was delivered to the court just minutes ago." Judge Thomas paused, his gaze dropping back to the documents now sitting heavier on the table. The folder, once slim, was now swollen, with implications. Then, for the first time that session, his voice shifted, not just in tone, but in weight. "This court acknowledges the seriousness of the allegations made by Representative Crockett." He closed the folder. "I will be postponing further proceedings to allow for a full preliminary review of the submitted evidence." A beat of stillness followed. Then he added, still not looking up, "The contempt hearing is hereby suspended pending that review. No gavel, no grand pronouncement, just a decision spoken plainly and dropped like stone into still water." Jasmine didn't move. Neither did her attorneys. But across the aisle, the prosecutor's shoulders sank, not in defeat, but in recognition. He understood what the judge's words meant. They weren't in control anymore. And outside those courtroom walls, control was already slipping. The story had begun to leak. The doors had barely swung shut behind Judge Thomas before the tremor rolled out. Phones that had been tucked away politely by aides and legal staff now buzzed with incoming messages, their screens lighting up with headlines and alerts. News travels fast in D.C., but in Columbus it travels differently, cautiously at first, then all at once. The first ping came from a congressional staffer in Baltimore. "Is it true? Beckman named in open court?" Then another, from a Phoenix-based political correspondent. "Hearing Crockett just dropped something huge. Real. Or a stunt?" Jasmine sat unmoved. Her fingers rested lightly on the table. Her expression didn't shift. But she knew. This next phase wasn't about facts. It was about perception. And perception spreads like smoke. Gabriel leaned toward her. "We've stirred the hive." Naomi added, low and unreadable. "Let's hope it's not hornets." Across the courtroom, the prosecutor still hadn't spoken. He remained seated, rifling through Jasmine's statement with jittery, uncertain hands. Every few lines he paused, underlined a section, then stared like it might change if he looked long enough. He didn't look like a man mounting a defense anymore. He looked like someone trying to figure out how he'd been outmaneuvered. Then came a soft cough from the back of the room. A bailiff close to 50, buzz-cut, crisp uniform, approached the bench. He leaned down and whispered something to the court clerk. The clerk frowned, jotted a note on a yellow slip, and crossed the room. Naomi took it, her brow lifted just slightly, and she passed it to Jasmine. Local station just aired excerpts of the statement. Anonymous leak. Jasmine didn't sigh, didn't flinch. Didn't take long, she murmured. Outside, the courthouse steps were beginning to fill. Reporters stood with phones raised, narrating live feeds. Some had already named Beckman outright. Others danced around it, waiting for official confirmation. Inside, the air shifted again. Not toward fear exactly. Not yet. But toward something looser, more uncertain. Even the court reporter, her fingers poised over the stenotype, looked up, like she wanted to ask, "What now?" Then the side door opened again. A court-martialed officer stepped into the room and, without ceremony, handed a sealed document directly to Judge Thomas's assistant. She scanned it quickly, whispered something to the judge, then took her seat again, her jaw clenched. Jasmine looked at Naomi. Naomi leaned in, voice low. It just dropped. Moments later, Judge Thomas spoke. No preamble, no hesitation. "This court has received additional documentation," he said, his tone level but charged with new weight, "submitted by an independent third party under federal whistleblower protections. The contents appear to corroborate key elements of Representative Crockett's sworn testimony." The prosecutor shot to his feet. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this proceeding is advancing without proper procedural review." "The court is not issuing a ruling," Thomas interrupted, voice sharp. "It is acknowledging the existence of new evidence. You will be granted full access to examine the materials." He turned back to Jasmine. "Do you have anything further to submit at this time?" She didn't pause. She reached into her case and pulled out a second folder, smaller but denser. This contains text logs and metadata from encrypted communications used by committee staff, she said clearly. It includes references to blocking budget reviews and instructions on how to frame my actions as disruptive. She passed it to the clerk. Judge Thomas nodded once. "Entered into preliminary record." That phrase, preliminary record, didn't sound explosive, but every legal mind in the courtroom knew its weight. It meant the court was listening. It meant Jasmine's words couldn't be dismissed out of hand. Gabriel leaned in. "We just bought time." "Not enough," Jasmine murmured. They'll hit back hard. Naomi agreed. They'll call you theatrical, say you're weaponizing your background. I don't care, Jasmine said. Let them. The receipts speak for themselves. The clerk rose. This court is adjourned until further notice. All parties will be informed once review of the documents is complete. With that, the courtroom emptied, but outside the storm had arrived. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Microphones and phones stretched toward Jasmine as she emerged. Representative Crockett, is it true? Are you accusing House members of corruption? Do you have proof? Will you testify before the Senate? Jasmine didn't stop. She walked straight past the chaos, flanked by Naomi and Gabriel, and climbed into the back seat of a waiting black SUV. The door closed behind her, muffling the noise. Only then did she speak. We crack the shell, she said. Let's see what crawls out. Back in D.C., the phones had already begun ringing, and not all of them were looking for answers. Some were scrambling for damage control. By the time Jasmine's SUV merged onto the I-270 loop outside Columbus, the headlines had already reached Capitol Hill. But this wasn't just chatter. It was movement. Every intern, every aide, every lobbyist tied to the Appropriations Committee was checking their phones, calls, pings, alerts. And somewhere between Alexandria and Silver Spring, a few inboxes were quietly being scrubbed clean. In Washington, no one waits for the ceiling to fall in. They move before it cracks. Representative Deirdre Leahy, who had sat silently at the ethics hearing just weeks prior, abruptly canceled 2 scheduled appearances that afternoon. Her office offered no explanation. Her chief of staff deleted his LinkedIn by sundown. Meanwhile, a scrappy local news station in Dayton broadcast Jasmine's entire courtroom statement, audio synced with on-screen transcription. No commentary, just the words. It was enough. By evening, cable news anchors were cautiously calling it a potentially explosive development in a rare contempt proceeding. But online wasn't cautious. Jasmine's name was trending, so was Beckman's, and so was the phrase, shell contracts. Inside a quiet office in the Capitol, 2 Judiciary Committee members huddled behind a closed door. Is any of this real? One asked. The documents look real. The other replied. And if they are, this goes way deeper than Beckman. How deep? The answer didn't come. Back in her D.C. apartment, Jasmine wasn't celebrating. She sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by files, papers scattered like puzzle pieces. Naomi and Gabriel paced nearby. We need to brace for coordinated pushback, Gabriel said. Not just from Beckman, from the party, from defense, contractors. Maybe even from justice, Naomi added. You're not the first to pull the thread, but you might be the first with hard proof and the guts to pull it in public. Jasmine looked up at them. They'll say I'm reckless. They already are, Naomi said. Then let's give them a reason to call me something else. Just then, Jasmine's phone rang. Private line. She answered, speaker on. A woman's voice came through, low, composed, deliberate. Congresswoman Crockett, I'm calling from a secure number. I worked under Beckman for 11 months. What you said today? I can back it, but not publicly. Not yet. Jasmine met Naomi's eyes. Naomi mouthed silently. Record it. Why now? Jasmine asked. Because he destroyed my friend's career, the woman said, voice unshaken. And it's time someone returned the favor. Addo. For asking the wrong question about funding, the woman on the call said. And I still have the emails. Then email them to me, Jasmine replied. No, the woman said. I'll bring them in person. The line went dead. Gabriel blinked. That's the third anonymous source today. Third we know of, Naomi muttered. This is about to blow wide open. And it did. By morning, Sloane Merrick, a former subcommittee analyst, published a written statement online. She detailed how she had witnessed direct interference in budget reviews and was ordered to suppress key documents tied to defense spending. Her timeline aligned with Jasmine's. Sloane didn't name names. She didn't have to. Her words echoed Jasmine's so closely. It felt less like corroboration and more like someone had duplicated a page from the same hidden playbook. Newsrooms started connecting dots. A public records request revealed that Beckman's brother-in-law had received 3 federal payments through a shell company during the last fiscal year. When a reporter dialed the company's listed number, it rang to a disconnected line. Then another domino fell. Senator Charles Fenwick, a long-standing Beckman ally and a behind-the-scenes force in military appropriations, announced his early retirement. No press conference, no farewell tour. Just a quiet one-line statement citing personal reasons. After 32 years in office, he vanished. Back in Jasmine's apartment, there was no celebration, just a heavy, watchful silence. Naomi sat on the couch, scrolling. This isn't the end, she said quietly. This is the beginning of something. They won't be able to clean it up, Jasmine replied. She stood, walked to the window, and stared out over the dark city. They called me defiant, she said softly. But defiance without purpose is just noise. I came here to do something that matters. And for once, the country's actually listening. But the machine she challenged wasn't finished with her yet. And what came next would test just how far it was willing to go to protect itself. 3 days later, Jasmine returned to the courthouse in Columbus. This time there were no whispers, no averted glances. Everyone in that room had read the headlines, seen the scramble in Washington, and watched the story spread like a fuse lit in dry grass. But the silence now had changed. It wasn't tension. It was calculation. Judge Clarence. Thomas sat at the bench, expression carved from stone. If the firestorm outside had shaken him, he didn't show it. But something was different. He no longer looked like a man ready to bring down a gavel. He looked like someone weighing the cost of what came next. The prosecutor was gone. In his place stood Elena Choi, a seasoned litigator from the Department of Justice, flown in overnight from Detroit. Her mere presence made the message clear. DOJ wasn't watching anymore. They were stepping in. Naomi leaned toward Jasmine. This isn't a hearing, she whispered. It's a warning, Gabriel added from the other side. They want control, not justice. Be smart. Judge Thomas spoke without formalities. This court has completed a preliminary review of the documents submitted by Representative Crockett and her counsel, he said. We have also received corroborating statements from multiple third parties. Based on the evidence, further examination is warranted. He looked directly at Jasmine. As such, the contempt proceedings against you are hereby suspended, indefinitely. No fines, no arrest. He glanced at a folder, then added, The materials submitted have been forwarded to the Office of Congressional Ethics and the DOJ's Internal Investigations Unit. Jasmine didn't flinch. This hearing, Thomas said, is no longer about your actions, Congresswoman. It is now about the credibility of those who attempted to silence you. Elena Choi rose. Her tone was even, restrained. Your Honor, the Department of Justice will be conducting an independent review. At this time, we have no additional motions, Thomas nodded. Then this court is adjourned. One strike of the gavel. No grand exit. just finality. Outside, the reaction was immediate. Before the doors even opened, one network called it the year's first major legal pivot. Another dubbed Jasmine a lightning rod for congressional accountability. She didn't hear any of it. She walked calmly past the noise, past the cameras, the questions, the clamor. No statement. Not yet. It wasn't until she was back in the car, Naomi beside her, Gabriel in the back, that she finally exhaled. Naomi turned to her. "You realize what you just did?" Jasmine looked out the window. "Yeah, I cracked it open." "No," Gabriel said from behind her. "You changed the direction of it." That night back in her apartment, there was no champagne, just takeout on the floor. Same cheap cartons, same 3 chairs pushed against the wall. But everything had changed. This time, the TV wasn't muted, the sound was on, and every channel had something to say. But none of them could agree on what. Pundits fumbled, spin started to run dry. One called it a political earthquake. Another tried, again, to brand Jasmine as reckless. But even he stumbled when pressed about the resignations stacking up behind Beckman, like fallen chess pieces. A leaked internal memo from Beckman's office showed deliberate non-cooperation with document requests. Another email surfaced, a thread between staff and a known contractor, tied to the very funding irregularities Jasmine had brought into the light. The hole was widening. But Jasmine knew the backlash hadn't even hit yet. It would come. Hearings, media smears, maybe even a probe into her own conduct just to cloud the water. That's how the game was played. But this time, people were watching. That changed things. She stood by the window again, staring out across the Capitol skyline. Gabriel joined her. "They're going to dig for something on you. Anything." "I've lived my whole life with that threat," she said quietly. "What's new?" Naomi called from the table. "What's new is you're not alone." For the first time in days, Jasmine let herself smile. Just barely. "I wasn't alone then either," she said. "You two had my back. Now the public does too." But while some doors were finally opening, others were slamming shut, and behind them was something Jasmine hadn't seen yet. A week later, she stood in the center of a quiet gymnasium in Toledo, Ohio. No cameras, no stage, just a town hall, folding chairs, black coffee in styrofoam cups, 24 people who came not for spectacle, but to look her in the eye. She didn't need a mic. A retired bus driver in the 3rd row stood and asked her, point blank, "Do you really think any of this will change?" Jasmine didn't dodge. She didn't look past him. She met his eyes. "I think they're scared enough to listen now." He nodded once, then sat. She could have said more. About process, reform, oversight. But they weren't here for polished answers. They were here to see if she'd flinch. She didn't. The story had already outgrown her. 1 week after Judge Thomas suspended proceedings, 3 senior aides across 2 different House offices resigned without fanfare. An ethics panel was formed, not to investigate her, but to comb through 2 years of budget decisions connected to defense contracts. Beckman, silent. No tweets, no statements, no denials. Just gone. Some said he was negotiating a quiet exit before his next term. Others whispered about sealed subpoenas. No one knew. But the gears were grinding, and Jasmine had thrown the first wrench. DC, the air wasn't exactly calm. Some media outlets tried painting her as strategic, accusing her of timing everything to influence an appropriations vote. Others claimed she was posturing for a Senate run. None of it stuck, because it wasn't her volume that shifted the story. It was that she never blinked. Later, in that same Toledo gym, After the chairs were stacked and the pamphlets packed away, a young woman approached Jasmine, early 20s, denim jacket, restless energy. "I've been following this since the court," she said. "I'm in law school now. I almost dropped out last semester. Thought I didn't belong." Jasmine looked at her gently. "Why?" The woman hesitated. "Because it all feels rigged. Like people like us don't win unless we lose something first." Jasmine rested a hand on her shoulder. "Then keep that part," she said. "The part you're scared they'll try to take. That's the part they can't fake." The young woman nodded, holding back tears. Then she walked out into the early evening light. By the end of the week, Jasmine had turned down every interview. No cable news, no podcasts, no statements. She let the documents speak for themselves. She knew there would be more hearings, more whispers, maybe more threats. But something had shifted, not just in headlines, but in people. A state rep in Arkansas cited her case to call for a budget transparency audit. A city councilwoman in New Mexico introduced an ordinance to publicly review lobbying contracts. They didn't mention Jasmine's name. They didn't have to. Her fingerprints were on the momentum. Meanwhile, back in Columbus, behind closed doors, Judge Thomas was still reviewing sealed documents. Evidence not yet made public. Some names needed protecting. Some truths needed time. But in his clock's notes, one line stood out. This was never just about contempt. At home, Jasmine finally took one night off. She sat barefoot on her couch, a bowl of cold pasta in her lap. Her phone lit up every few minutes. She didn't check it. Outside, the Capitol lights glowed silent and unmoved. Gabriel had once told her, "Sometimes justice doesn't knock. Sometimes it just shows up and refuses to leave the room." He was right. She hadn't come this far to be polite. She came to tell the truth, and to make sure it echoed. And she wasn't done yet. Some fights don't end with a ruling. They end when people stop being afraid to speak. Jasmine had just given them permission. If this story moved you, even a little, then remember, speak up when it matters. Ask the questions. Don't shrink when power walks in the room. And if the truth ever shakes, the walls where you stand, don't wait for permission to rise. Just stand